Hey YouTube, today we're going to talk about telephoto lenses and which one that I would recommend for you as an individual photographer. So, as you know, and have probably looked at them and drooled over them as everybody does, there are the big white telephoto lenses for Canon and the big black telephoto lenses for Nikon. And many people ask me, and just ask anybody, and always wondered, how do you know which telephoto lens to purchase? Now, unless you're made of bank, you can buy all of them, but for the most part, none of us are like that, so you have to pick one, and even then, it's still a very steep investment because these are all very, very, very expensive lenses. They start at, I think, $5,000, $6,000 minimum for starting with the 200mm 2.0. Now, let's go over the lineup. For Canon and Nikon, I believe, you could correct me if I'm wrong, only one I'm confused about is if Nikon has a 200 2.0 prime. I believe they do. But anyway, so the lineup is 200mm 2.0 IS and VR for Nikon, 300mm 2.8 IS Mark II for Canon, and VR 2, I believe, for Nikon. I don't know if they have a Mark II, I'm sorry. 400mm 2.8 IS Mark II for Canon, and I believe Nikon just announced their newest one. It was the VR2. There was more fancy stuff in there, but I forget the names. Then there's the 200 to 400 f4 for both Canon and Nikon, and Mark II for Nikon. And Canon just released their Mark I, which had the built-in 1.4 extender in addition to it. And then there was the 500mm VR. I don't know if they have version 2 for Nikon, I'm sorry. And then Canon has IS Mark II. And then the 600mm VR for Nikon, IS Mark II for Canon. Again, I don't know if there's a Mark II for Nikon. And then Nikon just came out with the 800mm 5.6 first version, and Canon is still on their first version for their 800mm, and it's 5.6. So there's your lineup. I'll throw in a photo so you guys can see the two lineups for both Canon and Nikon. Now, getting into which one should you purchase. That really depends on a lot of things, and I really can't answer it for every single photographer out there because it really depends what you are shooting or what you plan on doing with your photography career, or whatever it may be. I talked about touchy subjects in my last video, and this is another one. Just understand before I get into this is my opinion. It doesn't mean I'm right. Everybody has their own different decisions they want to make and their own different paths they want to take for their photography career. So with that in mind, just understand it's just my opinion. So here we go. So pretty much, let's just break it down. The 200mm and 300mm primes from both Canon and Nikon, I feel, in my opinion, are for very specific things. They are not your go-to all-around sports lenses, okay? And I feel the same way about the 500 and 600mm. They are for specific types of sports or shots, but they're not your go-to everyday sports lens. If you're covering multiple sports, I'm talking basketball, from basketball where it's just this compact, tight area indoors, to soccer, where it's the complete opposite. It's outdoor with a huge, large field, and lots of area to cover, So for basketball, a 300 would be ideal, or maybe a 200 2.0, because it's indoors and there's bad lighting. Those are the two lenses I would recommend for, something compact like that, like volleyball or basketball. But for soccer, outdoors with this large field, I would recommend a 500 or 600mm. That's what I typically will see at those events. Those are the lenses I would recommend for that. See how there's specific lenses in sports for specific type of sports. So, I mean, if you're doing one sport and you plan on doing that one sport for the rest of your life, then that's pretty much how you decide. I mean, if you're doing soccer, 500, 600. Maybe even I've seen people use a 400mm. I use a 400mm, but I am aware that there is limitations because it's not enough reach. Once you've hit that halfway point on a professional soccer field, they look like ants. and if you're behind the goal net. And for pro and college, they make you stay behind the goal net. Maybe other arenas are different, but for the ones I've been to, they make you stay behind the goal net. You can't go on the sides, you can't wander around like in high school sports or youth sports, so you're very limited, and that's when having the longer reach comes into play. I've seen people have multiple telephoto lenses where I've seen a 600 and a 400 and a 7200, and that's crazy, but I mean, that's like the ultimate setup, or maybe just a 200 to 400 with a 7200 on your side. There's so many different combinations and so many things to consider, and it's all, in the end, it's your decision. But if I was to recommend an all-around sports lens, telephoto, it would be either a 200 to 400 or a 400 millimeter prime. Now, if you're in agreement with me there, awesome. If you're in disagreement with me, that's fine. Like I said, everybody's different, but I strongly believe that the 400 millimeter range is the ultimate range for sports photography. It covers almost pretty much every sport, even basketball and volleyball. I have found plenty of ways to use a 400 millimeter for basketball. You may think that's crazy, but you can use it for macro stuff, like super close-ups of the coach on the side yelling, close-ups of a player, just little details, or if they're down the court, you can use it to get upper half body shots or turn it vertical, and when they're coming down the court after the opposing team scored and they're going to drive it down towards you, you can get a full body shot with the 400. There are ways to use it, and that's why I love the 400. It's because it's a prime. All those prime lenses make you think and find ways to use it properly, and it makes you, in my opinion, a better photographer when you have that limitation of one focal length, but you can still find ways to use it to your advantage. You're like, okay, I can turn it vertical and get a full body vertical shot, or I can, if they're really close to you, you can turn it back horizontal and get an upper half body shot. There's so many ways to use it. That's why I love the prime lenses. So anyway, I mean, if you're going to debate between the 400 millimeter and the 200 400, the only way you can really make the ultimate decision is, well, first off, they're both great. Which one's better? I don't know. Like, if you're asking me like spec-wise and quality of the images, I would assume the prime lenses for Canon or Nikon are better, because primes have just always shown to be better quality images and better all around. The only con is that you are limited to one focal length with the 400s, and opposed to going from 200 all the way through 300 all the way up to 400. And with Canon, you have the 1.4 extender. But if you're buying the Canon version of it, and you're going to be shooting with the extender on all the time, I wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend a 500 or 600, because that's not what that lens is made for. That extender is there just if you occasionally will want to have that extra reach for that little bit of time. But if you're constantly using the extender, well, I mean, essentially it's just kind of a waste of money, because if you're always in that longer focal length, get a 500, 600, But if you're deciding between the 400 and 600, I mean, the difference is really just the f4 and the 2.8 mainly. If you don't need 2.8, then I would recommend a 200 or 400. If you do feel like you will need a 2.8 where you're in situations where you're shooting indoors and the lighting is terrible, then I would recommend the 2.8. I have personally been in pro events where the lighting is just awful. I shot basketball at the Honda Center where the Ducks play in Anaheim, and for both hockey and basketball, it's just terrible lighting. I was at 6400 ISO just to get 6/40th of a second at 2.8. And if I was at f4, I think there was a guy who was shooting next to me. He had a 200 400, and he was at 12,800 ISO. So there's a big difference. And yes, we have the pro bodies, and it can handle those ISOs, but in the end, everybody wants higher quality images. So with a lower ISO, you're going to get better quality images. That's where the 2.8 shines. So, I mean, and even for me, just to give you guys an idea, even if the 200 or 400 millimeter was a 2.8, I would still pick the 400. And that's just me. So, some people may think I'm crazy, But I just like the primes. I like how they make you think, and I've always shot with them, so I like them. I love my 70-200 millimeter. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it just depends on you. So let's just break it down. I feel that a lot of people. Well, first let's not break it down. Let's just get into this first. People make the mistake of buying the 300 millimeter instead of the 400. A lot of people are going to probably get really mad at me for saying this, because I know people that have the 300 millimeter and they had the decision, they had to choose between the two, and I get why people do it. People buy the 300 millimeter because they see the price tag on the 400, and it scares them because it's very expensive. And opposed to the 300, they're both really expensive, but the 300 millimeter is way cheaper than the 400. I believe Canon's IS Mark II 300 2.8 is $6,500 now. They brought the price down. It used to be $7,200. And then the 400 millimeter 2.8 IS Mark II from Canon, when it first came out, was $11,500 plus tax. So you're looking at about $12,000, in opposed to $7,000. So that's, I'm bad at math. 8, 9, 10. That's $5,000 difference for 100 millimeter focal length difference. And a lot of people think, well, that's a no-brainer. Well, hold on. Hear me out. That 100 millimeters is a very big difference, okay? Now, if you're doing, high school stuff and youth stuff, it's still there. There will be a difference, but not as much as if you're doing pro or college, or if you plan on doing pro or college stuff and you want to take your photography career a step ahead and get to that point of covering pro events and college events. I would strongly, strongly, strongly urge you to not purchase the 300 millimeter and get the 400, because that extra 100 millimeters is going to make you just be very thankful that you did it, because it is such a huge difference. And I know it sounds crazy, you're like, that's not that much, I'll be fine. But I think there was somebody, who was it? There's a wildlife photographer who did a video on the 600 millimeter. It's on YouTube still. Check it out. He did a review on the 600 millimeter f4 IS Mark II. And he was talking about the 500 millimeter versus it, and he said, you mentioned the 100 millimeters difference, and from what he said, correct me if I'm wrong, but he said 100 millimeters difference. If you have a 500, if you use the 600 and opposed to the 500, that extra 100 millimeters is giving you 44% more pixels in your image. So that is a lot more detail that you're getting from that 100 millimeters if you're in the same spot. I mean, yeah, people can say you can move forward to get the extra 100 millimeters with your feet. You can zoom in with your feet. People say that all the time. But there's, like I said, with the pro and college, you're very limited on where you can go. And with baseball especially, just imagine baseball. You're in the photo well next to the dugout. You can't go on the field. And you can argue, well, you can crop. Well, if you're relying on cropping your images equal to a 400 millimeter with a 300 millimeter, then, I mean, I don't know how to convince you or use that against you as an argument, but who is going to agree that cropping your images is the best thing to do? And no, most of the photographers are against it fully. They don't crop their images, and I mean, I'm for that too. I try to avoid cropping my images, but we all crop our images. We have to crop our images, and I'm going to get probably stabbed for saying that, but that's just the way it is. Everybody that's shooting, you're going to have to crop your images. But avoid cropping a lot, and make it as minimum as possible. When you're using a 300 millimeter for pro and college, you're cropping a significant amount to get tight in on the action, especially for larger fields. And if you're covering all these sports with all these different, lengths of, sizes of fields and stuff where your subject's at, the 300 doesn't do everything. It's not the jack of all trades, I guess you can say. The 400 millimeter is, and a lot of people try to avoid getting the 400 because they're scared of the price tag. And I'm telling you now, if you're one of those people who have already purchased the 300 millimeter, I can't talk today. If you're one of those people who have already purchased a 300 millimeter, or you're right now deciding, I'm here to tell you to try your best to not buy it and just save the extra couple grand or whatever version you're getting. There's so many different versions of the lens, but whatever one you're getting, just save the extra whatever amount you need to get the 400. And another argument people use on me is, oh, well, you can just attach a 1.4 converter on the 300 millimeter and get I don't know what the focal length is. I think it's like 420 millimeters or somewhere close to 400, if not a little bit over. But that's a very, very dumb argument in my opinion. And the reason is, think about it. Let me just put this $500 piece of glass over my lens and say that this compares and is the same as a $12,000 piece of glass. I mean, are you really going to argue with that? Is that how you're going to use that against me in an argument? I mean, come on. Comparing a $500 piece of glass that makes you lose a stop of light, so if you're shooting with 300 2.8 lens, it'll go to f4. It makes you lose image quality. It slows down your autofocus speed. I mean, that's just foolish to use that argument. I mean, yes, I would recommend getting the 1.4 converter if you do have the 300, just to have that extra reach for situations where the lighting's good and you can use f4. But you don't want to rely on it. I have the 1.4 converter, and I will occasionally put it on my 400 millimeter if I need that extra reach. I actually did it just over this weekend for a shoot. I was assigned, and it works great. But it's just there to have it occasionally, just in case. For you to buy a cheaper lens and attach it on there for everything, or most sports where you need that reach, is just foolish, because it's just not the way to go about it. And a lot of people don't like to hear that. And I'm sure I'm offending some people. I don't mean any offense to you. I don't mean to tell you you're dumb for buying a 300. It's not like that at all. It's just people, I've read articles on it all the time. I've seen it everywhere. People make the mistake of purchasing the 300 millimeter instead of the 400 because of the price tag. They think, oh, it's just 100 millimeters difference. But the higher up you go in events, from youth to high school to college to pro, to even Olympics or whatever, something as crazy as that, you're more limited and restricted on where you can go. That's why you see a lot of people on NFL football games, if you watch on TV, 90% of those people have a 400. Some people have 300, some people have 500, 600, but most of it is 400. Just pay attention next time you watch a game, or if you look it up. Most photographers are using a 400. But like I said, there's exceptions to everything. Okay, so that's just my take on it. So if I'm going to tell you, I guess the conclusion of the video is I would recommend the 400 millimeter if you're doing most sports. If you're doing one particular sport, I mean, I hope my previous comments earlier answered the question for you. If it didn't, just leave a comment and tell me what sport that you're shooting, and I'll recommend a lens. There is no lens that does everything. That people need to understand that. So smacking on that 1.4 converter on a 300 or 200 prime is not going to do what a 400 is going to do. You will get that reach, but you're not going to get the same quality and the same keeper rate and the same precision on the autofocus that the 400 prime will get when you have a 1.4 converter, $500 piece of glass, putting over your $7,000 piece of glass and comparing that to the $12,000 piece of glass. So that's it for this video, guys. I hope it helped you guys out on making your decision. If it didn't help you out, comment, ask me a question, throw it at me. And I hope none of you guys got offended that I said the 300 is not the lens to use for all sports. That is just my opinion. I feel that it is a very specific lens for specific sports, as well as the 200 and the 500 and 600. I feel that the 400 millimeter prime, or the 200 to 400, is the lens that you would want to use for pretty much all sports, because they are just that sweet spot in that focal length for sports. Also, this is for full frame. I forgot to mention that. Damn it. Really quickly, full frame cameras, the 400 is a sweet spot. I mean, even with crop, the 400 is pretty good, and people will use that argument as well. Like, well, what if I have a 7D and I'm using the 300? I mean, ultimately, you want to reach to get a full frame camera. That's my opinion again, because they're just all around better. A crop camera, yeah, it's giving you more reach, but here's what it's doing. You're not going to get the same picture quality out of a cropped sensor that you will out of a full frame, a newer full frame, I should say. I don't know all these technical specs, but I've seen the images side by side. I've seen it. I've used 7Ds before. I've used Rebels before. To compare those image qualities with the 1DX is just ridiculous. And over 5D3 or 6D, it's not the same. What those cameras are doing is they're essentially cropping the photo for you. So if you have a 1.6 crop sensor, the camera automatically is cropping 60% out of your frame. from where you're at. That's what it's doing. So you're losing picture quality essentially when you're shooting with a crop sensor, because it's cropping the image for you. And then if you're shooting and you need to crop even more, well, I mean, you're just losing more image quality. It doesn't matter how nice of a camera you have, whether it's a Hasselblad or 1DX or D4S, whatever. With the top end lens, you're gonna lose image quality when you crop your photo, no matter how good of a camera you have. Does it make a difference? Yes, it can. But it depends how much you're cropping. You know, if your subject, you know, here's your frame right here, right? This is the frame. And you're cropping out just like down to this much right here. Look how much is gone. You're cropping all this out and zooming in more on it. It's going to make it more pixelated, or you're going to lose more image quality when you do that. So that's a whole other topic, but anyway, I hope this video helped you guys out. Feel free to leave comments and ask me any questions in the comments. Thank you guys for all your support, and I hope this video helped you guys make your ultimate decision on which big telephoto lens you should get. Again, if not, leave a comment and ask me questions. Feel free to ask me anything. And I'll see you guys next time.